Thank you everybody for your attention. I'm really pleased to have the chance to talk to you today about startups. As I'll describe in a moment, my whole professional life for about the past 15, maybe even 20 years has been all about startups. So I really enjoy the topic, and I love being a part of other people's initiatives to get companies off the ground. I've taken the perspective that all of you are new to the idea of starting a company or how to commercialize your research. So this is a very high-level introductory overview of many topics, but I can go very deep on any particular topic if you want me to. So by all means, ask questions. We've got a nice audience here, but it's small enough so that if you just want to interrupt, it's much more important that I cover what you want to hear than me just following the slides. So the slides are really just an outline of the topics that I want to talk about. There's not a lot of deep organization to this. There we go. So my goal today is to just give you a broad overview, as I said, of all of the different things that you need to think about if you're considering forming a company, and in particular applying for the venture grants. Okay? Now there are many ways in which you might commercialize your technology besides starting a company. But my focus today is predominantly on starting a company, and you're going to hear a lot of stuff that's going to appear as though there are many things to worry about, and there are. Okay, but at the end I'll have a slide that shows you what I think you need to worry about right now. So I'm going to cover everything, everything you need to do to start a business and then ultimately make money with it. But in the short run, where you just have an idea and you're just getting started, you can't do everything. So I will summarize what I think you need to focus on in the short run. And again, feel free to ask any questions or interrupt me at any time. So as Corinne mentioned in the introduction, Illinois Partners is my firm. But what I do is assist startups. I've been the founding CEO of about 6 different companies, all of them based on technologies that come out of universities or federal laboratories like Argonne. I do a lot of consulting for universities like Northern, where I'm helping to look at technologies and evaluate and recommend approaches to how to commercialize those technologies. Earlier in my career, I worked for IBM and Microsoft. I've got a background in engineering. I've got an MBA. And so you put all of those different skills together, and in a startup, you need somebody who's got a lot of breadth, very broad, doing a lot of different things. Many of you who are researchers probably are very narrow and deep in your specific fields, and that's very important for developing the technology. But in a company, you need people who have the finance and the sales and the marketing skills, and those are the pieces that I typically bring to startups. Here are just some links. I'll repeat this at the end, and I can make the slides available to you as well. But just so you know who I am and how to follow me or reach me if you have any other questions. I didn't put my phone number on here or my email because this will probably wind up on the internet somewhere. But if you have any questions, you can reach me through my website. There's a contact form on there. I do blog about topics related to startups. I encourage you to check that out. And if you're on Twitter, you can follow me there as well. So let me get started. The first question, or the first thing to really evaluate, is what is your motivation? Okay? Now this sounds, a little bit fluffy, but it's really very important, because if you're sitting here considering trying to commercialize your technology or being part of a startup, you're at the beginning of a process that can last anywhere from a few years to the rest of your career, depending upon how things work out. So everybody's motivated for different reasons. Some of you whose names are behind the research may have a motivation that's very different than the business people or the investors who get involved with you. So I just encourage you to consider these questions, and when I meet students, or often when I'm working with professors or academics who want to start a business, the first principle, and I really do ask these questions of people, is why are you doing this? What is your definition of success? Okay? Is it to make a lot of money, which certainly is possible in the limit, but highly, highly unlikely? Okay, and if your sole motivation is to make money, there's probably, on a risk-adjusted basis, many better ways of doing it. But nonetheless, that's the motivation for some people. Some people want to get famous if you're the founder of a company. Depending upon the work that you do and how innovative your technology is, there may be ways in which you can benefit from that. I've met many professors who, when I ask them this question, they say their goal is they want to see their work implemented. They want to see it help people. Maybe they've developed a technique or an apparatus. Maybe it's named after them, I don't know. But they just want to see the work that they do in the research lab ultimately provide some benefit, either commercially or to society. Sometimes people's motivation is social, depending upon the nature of what you're doing. It may be a medical device, you may be a social entrepreneur where the goal isn't money, but it's to provide benefit to other people. Some of you may be looking to create jobs for yourself, and that's a very common motivation. Everybody's got a motivation, so you don't need to shout it out to me, but I really encourage you, particularly if you're applying for the grant program or think that you're going to go beyond that, figure out why you are doing this. Okay? Now, I tried to put these in some order, but really there's no order to it. So imagine that everything that I'm talking about is sort of equal in status, but I had to organize the slides some way to make this intelligible. So my presumption is that all of you here are affiliated with the university, and particularly for those of you going through the grant writing exercise, the core of your idea or what you're starting with is technology. Okay, it's something that came out of your student work or it's something that came out of your lab. Okay? Now, technology or an idea or an invention is certainly not enough to build a successful business. But I would also say that unless you have some unique technology, you probably don't have enough to start a business. You understand? Okay, so a good idea is necessary. It's not enough, okay, in order to have a business. So the first thing is, what is it? Okay, I saw all of those of you who had those tabletop exhibits 2 weeks ago. I saw those, and in the case of some of them, I had deep conversations with you, and I understand, what it is that you have. In other cases, I'm less clear. So the first step is to really identify and get your arms around what is it that you have that's unique. Is it an idea? Is it a patent? If it's something that came out of the science lab, is it a method? Is it a device? Is it an algorithm? Is it a piece of code? Okay, what is it? Okay, you got to start there. The second piece is that thing protected? And when I say protected, generally I'm talking about protected by patents. Okay, because if you have a technology that is accessible to anybody, that you've published and anybody can copy it and anybody can do it, it may be valuable, but as I'm sure you can appreciate, investors and other people are not going to want to invest in you, because the minute that somebody sees that what you have is working or it's a good idea, any other company, any bigger company, any other party with money can come and do the same thing, right? So a patent is very important in this context because that's what gives you the protection to have the time to develop your technology without any competitors. So you should be talking to the tech transfer office here, Rita, okay, to work through that. In some cases, I know you've already filed patents, in some cases provisional patents, but if it's research that you're doing and you're talking about publishing it or you're presenting at conferences and you haven't filed a patent on it yet, then you may have a problem on your hands. And so you just want to make sure that you take advantage of talking to the licensing office. It really does sometimes happen that people come up with great ideas, but if you disclose it publicly, like at a conference, before you file a patent on it, then you may put it out there for anybody to use. Now, I know there's another seminar coming up, right, on intellectual property and patents, so I don't want to be any more specific about what it means to get a patent, other than to make you aware that if you haven't already filed for one, you better be talking to Rita to at least understand what you've got. Now, the third bullet, will it work? I can't tell you how many times I've encountered people, often academics, professors, or maybe they're grad students, with concept, okay, or some small demonstration of something that occurred in the laboratory, but it isn't really quite proven. It's more of a hypothesis, okay? So a hypothesis is a good place to start, and that's appropriate for research, but you can't start a business with a hypothesis. You have to have something that is demonstrated to have worked, okay? And I'll come back to that at the end. Now, I don't mean that, let me rephrase that, if it doesn't work yet, you should continue to work on it, okay? It just may mean that you're not ready to start a business yet, okay? There's a place for research, okay? But the research, when you want to put it into the company, you got to be pretty close to having some understanding of what it can or can't do. Now, I don't know what all of your backgrounds are, but I'll just share with you from my own personal experience, a company that I started based on technology that came out of Argonne National Laboratory. It was a way for making synthetic diamond. We turned natural gas into diamond using a process very much like the way semiconductors are manufactured. Now, at the time we started the company, there was, well, let me back up. When the research was being done at Argonne, for many, many years, there was a big controversy and a lot of questions in the research community whether or not the carbon material that the scientists were making was in fact diamond. So it took them several years to prove that they were actually making diamond, okay? Then we started the company, but we couldn't succeed as a business until we took that science and turned it into something that we could do day in and day out, over and over and over again with high quality, making diamond in large pieces. We had to refine it so that it became industrial. Okay? But at least when we started the company, we knew we could make diamond, and the risk was whether we could take that idea and turn it into something that was industrial. So the so-called scale problem, you've demonstrated something and now you're wondering whether you can scale it up. Those are challenges that are appropriate for a company to deal with. But if you're still back over here in, gee, I don't know if it's going to work, get it to work before you think about starting a business. As I touched upon, manufacturing is a huge issue. This doesn't apply so much with software, but any kind of medical device, any kind of material, any kind of apparatus, okay? I don't care how good it is, I don't care how useful it seems to be, unless some big company is able to make it in very high volumes, inexpensively, over and over again, reproducibly, you probably don't have very much. Now, of course, there are exceptions, and I'm giving you a very general statement. And not every innovation has to, go into a cell phone and be made by the billions. But a lot of times we see innovations or ideas that require so much, manual work, and things don't work, and there's rework, and you do it over and over again. As a researcher, that's fine, and then you can write a paper and say, see, we did it. But you can imagine that in a manufacturing environment or in the real world where you want to make something over and over again and sell it, that isn't going to work, okay? And it's a continuum, right? But you just really want to get comfortable with the idea that your idea can be manufactured, or the unknowns or the risks to working the bugs out are predominantly engineering risks and identifiable as opposed to risks in the basic science. Okay? Interrupt if you have any questions. Now, you may not always know for sure, okay? And some of this kind of comes down to a judgment, okay? But you could imagine that sometimes you see technologies where you say, well, like, let's say it's a sensor device that goes into a cell phone, for example. Maybe you've developed a new sensor, and there are many other sensors on the market. So it's reasonable to assume, if you're using the same techniques to manufacture it, it's reasonable to say well, our device is kind of like that device, and if that could be scaled up, chances are ours could be too. But if it's an altogether new thing, if it's a new material that's never been made before, who knows, okay? And again, there's a spectrum here. And I'm not ever suggesting that you stop working on something. The only decision is when is it time to think about starting a company, and when do you still have more work to do in the lab, okay? Now the last point is a little bit more complex, and I'm sure you'll hear about this when the attorney talks to you, but just having a patent by itself is not enough, okay? Because you also need to be sure that whatever idea you have for your product doesn't infringe on somebody else's patent, right? So, for example, here's a Samsung smartphone. Let's just say, for example, that you, I don't know, let's just say you came out with a new type of display, okay, or a new type of material for display, all right? Now that may be a great breakthrough, and you may have a patent on that. But if your business idea was, we're going to make a smartphone, you can imagine that there's a lot of other stuff in here that's probably protected by patents from Samsung and God knows who else, Google and others, that they had to license in order to be able to do this, right? Samsung's probably paying royalties to somebody else to do this, and other companies are making the chips and many of the components here, right? So you just can't go do that, okay? So freedom to operate is sort of this idea, again, let's just say you made a new material for a display. You may have a patent on that, which means nobody else can make that material, but you cannot make a smartphone from it, okay? And those types of decisions are going to drive your business strategy, okay? In the example that I'm using, if I have a material, maybe what I should do is take my material and go sell it to Samsung, right? Or I have to go to a whole bunch of other companies and license their patents so that I have the freedom to make the product that I want. But you cannot answer that question until you have some idea of what your product is going to be. Okay? It's not a question so much about your invention. It's more of a question of what are you going to do with it. I don't remember who it was, but one of you had was it some sound thing that you're using in neonatal intensive care, right? Okay, so there you've got a general purpose invention, right? But you've chosen a very specific place to take it. You understand the difference? Okay. All right, now, like I told you at the beginning, there's a lot of stuff here. You don't necessarily, it would be impossible for you and unreasonable to assume that you'll have answers to all of these questions now. But I'm just trying to condition you for where you're going, okay? Aside from, there's probably 3 or 4 sort of very important things that you have to deal with. And again, I'll summarize them later. Protecting the technology is critical, because if the technology is not protected, you can sort of do everything else right, and you probably will not succeed, okay? But the second, and arguably even more important piece of it, is understanding your market. Because we all have heard stories, and I've lived through many examples of good, innovative ideas, but there's no customers, right? Or the customers don't want to pay what it's going to cost to buy your thing because there's other options available to them. We all know this. The best technologies does not always win, okay? So it's really, really, really important. If you read my blog, I wrote a post about this. This is the #1 issue, even though I didn't put it first in the slides, is understanding who are your customers. Now, I'll tell you, for where you are now, you may not know. Okay? Apparently you've already made a decision because you took an acoustic technology, and now you know that your customers are hospitals that have neonatal intensive care units. Okay? So that's a big step forward, but I would imagine, too, there's a lot of other markets for your technology as well. Okay? So I'm very supportive of picking one thing and focusing on it, but it's very important that you understand who are your customers. It can't be everybody. Okay? You got to start somewhere. You got to know who they are, and you got to know what they're going to buy from you. Okay? Again, are you selling to another company like Samsung who's buying a material or a component? Or are you making a final product that you're selling to a hospital? Or is it a consumer product that you're going to sell at Walmart? Or is it an app that's going to go on the App Store? Okay? You got to know who your customers are, what it is that you're selling them. Okay? And critically, I say there, is it a product like an app might be, or a consumer product? Or is it a feature, like a material that requires you to sell to another company who's incorporating it in some other device which ultimately they sell? And you can imagine there's a big difference in the salespeople that you need and how you advertise and market your technology depending upon whether my customer is Samsung or my customer is a 10-year-old who goes to the App Store who I want to download my game. Okay? So you really got to understand, and you won't know all the answers, okay? But you got to have a vision. You got to come up with at least a hypothesis or an idea of where you're going to go. So you need to know what you're selling and to whom, and then why will they buy it? Okay? What is the value that you're delivering? Is it entertainment? Is it a medical device where you're saving lives? Are you saving money? Okay, in the treatment of medical things? Is it, something that's nice to have, like a leather purse, which nobody needs? There's many cheaper purses available if it's the utility that somebody wants. Okay, but there's something to be said for the brand and the luxury and the experience. Okay, so what are you selling, to whom, and why will they buy it? What is the thing about it that makes them need it? Okay? Is it a must-have? Is it a life-saving device? Or is it something more like a leather purse where people, you just know if you're selling a leather purse, poor people aren't going to buy it if they're not eating. Right? Okay, so what you're selling is, is then determines who you're selling it to and where you go to reach those people. And you want to know what their alternatives are. Okay? In the case of a leather purse, the obvious alternative is a cheaper utilitarian purse. Okay? Nobody needs it. In the case of, let me go back to my example. Let's say I make a new material here. Okay? And let's say it's better. It's lighter weight and it's cheaper. Okay? And my customer is Samsung in this example. Okay? Samsung can continue to sell this. Okay? So they have an alternative. They don't have to buy from me. Okay? I have to be able to justify why they should buy from me. And maybe the justification is that with my material in their smartphone, they have a better smartphone. Maybe it's less weight. Maybe it lasts longer. Maybe it's cheaper. Maybe it gives better resolution. Okay? And then if Samsung doesn't want it, then maybe Apple wants it. Okay? So in almost every instance, everybody's got an alternative, unless it's, like a cure for cancer where the alternative is dying. But in most cases, okay, somebody's having their needs met already today, or they have options. Okay? I mean, I'm sure everybody talks about Apple products. I mean, I have an iPad. Okay? Now, at the time I got an iPad, there really weren't any other tablets, but I didn't have to buy anything. Okay? Now, if you go into the market for a tablet, there's a lot of choices. Okay? So there's always alternatives. Right? Now, this point is really important, and I'll admit that it's going to be very hard for you to know the answer to this precisely, given where you're at today. But as you think about building your business, if you ever get to the point where you apply for an SBIR, if you ever get to the point to where you want to raise money from investors, you will have to have answers to these questions. You may not have answers today. But understanding how large is the market for the stuff that you're selling is really important. Okay? So purses is another good example. Okay? If you're making a high-end leather purse, your market is not everybody who buys a purse. Right? Because not everybody's in the market for a luxury purse. So you really have to think clearly and get some good guidance, and you may have to do some research to really narrow down what you're doing. Okay? We all understand, because I'm sure everybody was paying attention a couple of years ago when the iPad came out, okay, at that time, everybody said, well, who knows what the market is for tablets? Because there was no market for tablet computers because there were no tablet computers. But in reality, Apple, has made a lot of money because they expanded the market. Many people like me became buyers who initially didn't think I needed one, okay? And now the market is much bigger, but there are many other companies too, right? But the market for tablets or an iPad is not everybody in the United States or everybody in the world. They have a certain level of income, probably, in order to be able to afford it. They may have to have a certain level of technology sophistication, okay? Think of something more simple like a parka, okay? If you live in Chicago or the northern Illinois area, you have to own a parka. You may only wear it 20 days a year, but you have to own one because there will be days like today when it's a necessity. If you live in Arizona, you don't need one. Okay, so your market, if you're selling clothes, is not everybody, even though everybody in theory could buy from you. You have to be very specific and understand who your market is, and then are they identifiable? Okay, so again, for example, if you're selling to neonatal ICU units, that's pretty good in the sense that very easily, I'm sure, you can get a list of all of your prospective customers. That's nice, okay? But if I'm selling purses, for example, okay, what do? I gotta probably sell through a retailer, okay? More or less, okay? So knowing who your customers are and how you can identify them and how you reach them, very, very, very important as well. And you sort of have to think through, is the sale of my product made from me to whoever the ultimate consumer is? Let me think of a good example of that. Like, some of these services online now where you could custom design a shirt, for example, right? So I'm buying a custom shirt directly from the people who make it. Or am I going to a store to buy a shirt, in which case the maker of the shirt sold that shirt not to me, they sold it to a distributor who sold it to a retailer who sold it to me. Okay? And who makes money and how you get paid, and everybody's got to take a piece of the action along that spectrum. Really tough things to say. If I'm making a material and I know that my target customers are basically Samsung and Apple, then there's a very small number of very large customers to call on. If I'm selling purses, I've got completely the opposite problem. Okay? Now, again, in my example, if I was selling parkas, for example, it would be foolish to advertise in Arizona, but I might advertise in Alaska. Okay? So all of this is obvious, right, when you think about it, but it's very hard when you're sitting down thinking about your idea to anticipate all of these questions. Now, you can go buy books, there's seminars available, a lot of this is free online. There's just no shortage of help that you can get on kind of how to write a business plan and so forth, which eventually you'll need to do. I'm just trying to make you aware of all of the stuff that you need to kind of think about. Is this appropriate? I mean, the right level of detail and stuff? Okay. And then lastly, what does the competition look like? Okay, and obviously the answer to that question is unique and specific to the nature of what you're doing. Okay, if in my example, if I'm selling, and the competition again is about my particular product. So if I'm selling a material that's for displays, okay, and Samsung is my customer, my competition are other people that sell materials for displays, glass companies, for example, a company like Corning. But if I'm selling a whole smartphone, okay, then my competition is not the glass manufacturer, it's the other smartphone companies like Google, perhaps, or Motorola or Nokia or Apple or HTC or whoever. Okay? So anyway, you get the point, but it's really important that you understand who your competition is, and competition is defined as an alternative that your customers are going to think about. Okay? Now in your case, I don't know if there's other systems like what you have for neonatal intensive care. Like, imagine if you made orthopedic implants, just as a hypothetical, made artificial hips. There's several companies that make artificial hips, right? So no matter how good your product is, there's some other salesperson from some other company arguing why his product is better, okay? And obviously, people, doctors or consumers don't need both, right? Once, there are some people who think this Galaxy S3 is the best smartphone around, and there's other people who passionately think that an iPhone is better, right? And you can't convince the iPhone bigots that an Android phone is any good. I prefer it, okay? And so everybody's got a different opinion, and out of that come markets, okay? But obviously, if you own this, you don't also need an iPhone. They're pretty much direct substitutes and direct competition, right? An iPad is not competition because it provides a different function. All right. Now, I'm sort of talking here a little bit about business planning. We've talked so far about what is it that you have that's unique, and what are you going to make, and who are you going to sell it to. Okay? Those are the questions predominantly that you need to have now, to have answers to now. Okay? The rest of this stuff, very, very important, but it's just maybe 1 inch farther down the road. Okay? Very hard to answer these questions if you don't know who your market is, if you don't know what your product's going to look like. It's hard to answer these questions. Okay? But the first one, how are you going to make what you sell? Okay, so if you're a software company, okay, probably a non-issue. But if you're making a medical device, or somebody had corneal implants or something like that, right? I don't remember what team that was. Was that you? Okay. How are you going to make those?
We don't.
Huh?
We're hoping Bosch and Lomb will make them.
Okay, well, so, and are they going to make them for you? Or are you going to license the whole technology to them?
I think licensing the technology to them is a preferred method.
Okay, I would say that's a very reasonable answer, and that may be the appropriate way to go, but you can understand how your projections and your plan are highly dependent on whether what you need to do is convince Bausch & Lomb to license your technology versus an alternative, which is I'm going to build a business making corneal implants, and I'm going to go hire 50 salespeople who are going to call on ophthalmologists, and we're going to go speak at conferences and influence key opinion leaders because we're going to be the manufacturer of this device. And oh, by the way, we need FDA approval and all that other stuff, right? Okay. At the end of the day, it may, if I were a patient needing such a thing, what I'm getting might be identical, okay? But for you, as the owner of the idea and the intellectual property, how you get it to market, very much a function of all of these different decisions, okay? So, I mean, a licensing business is very legitimate and appropriate for a startup as well. But you it helps to have that clarity of whether or not your goal is to have a factory and a clean room and doctors on staff and probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of budget to do all the product development and approvals, or you just get it far enough along that we know it's viable and then let Bausch & Lomb worry about it. Now they're going to take the majority of the profit, but they're going to take all the risk and give you a piece of it. So I'm not saying which is the right answer. I'm only saying I'm trying to emphasize the importance of having that clarity and knowing what you're doing. Right? Because when we talk about financing, the people that you hire, the money that you require, the facilities that you need are all a direct function of that strategic choice. Right?
And that's actually knowing the answers to all of these questions will help you have a better conversation with your Bausch & Lomb or whoever you want to license with.
Oh, yeah, that goes without saying.
Absolutely.
Likewise for you with your acoustic device, if your initial target market is hospitals, that's fine, okay? But a lot of times I've seen technologies where maybe, and this is a pure guess on my part, maybe your same technology could be used for automotive applications, right? So maybe your business idea then becomes, we want to build a business and we're going to focus on hospitals, but once we've developed the core technology, we can license it to somebody else who can go do something with it in automotive. We get a little money from that, but we don't have to bother ourselves with it. That happens all the time, okay? So again, I'm just trying to beat you over the head with the necessity of understanding what your vision is and where you're going and the kind of business you're trying to build. Now, nobody ever gets this right first, and no matter what you think, as you start down the path, other things may happen, right? That may cause you to say, well, we were going to do this, but now we discovered that we can't, okay? Or you may start down, you know, this hospital path and discover, because somebody else has a patent or because of FDA regulations or FCC requirements or who knows what, that it just won't work, okay? And then you got to switch gears. But you got to start and have an opinion about what you're going to do. Okay, so how will it get to the customer? Obviously, in your case, if you license to Bausch & Lomb, that's their problem, okay? And those are very difficult things for a startup to deal with, so it's wholly appropriate to let a big company do that. But if you're going after a smaller number of potential customers, you know, is it something that requires physical delivery? Is it something that has to be sold through a supply chain, meaning like an example of the purse that I used, okay? If you know, if I wanted to sell a leather purse and I wanted it available at Nordstrom, okay, I've got to sell it to Nordstrom, I've got to convince them to put it on their shelf, and then somebody's got to walk into that store and buy it. Okay, so understanding how you go from your product to whoever the final user is really important. If you're selling into automotive, there's, you know, layer upon layer upon layer, right? You might sell a chip that gets bought by somebody who makes a system, who puts it into a sub-assembly, who sells it to an OEM. I mean, you know, aerospace for sure. It's very, very, very complicated. So you just got to think through that. If it's software, it tends to be much easier, okay? But if you're making software, are you going to sell it directly through your website? Is it an app that goes through the App Store? Is it shrink wrap software where you have to sell it and ship discs to people? I mean, you just got to think through those questions. Making a decision about how much to charge could be the subject of an entire seminar in itself. And there's no right answer, but whether you look at your costs and say, hey, it cost me $1 to make it, I want to charge $2 for it, okay? Or you say, you know, it cost me $1 to make, but I'm saving somebody's life, okay? So I'm going to charge a lot for it because the value that I'm delivering is very compelling. Or, you know, in my example, you know, I'm selling something that's clearly superior to Samsung, but they say, well, you know, it costs us 10 cents for a display today, yours may be better, but we have to save money, so we're not going to pay you any more than 10 cents, no matter what your costs are. So again, you need to know who your customer is, how they view the value that you're delivering. And this is a very, very difficult question to answer when you're just at the idea stage. But it's usually one of the biggest stumbling blocks for startups or for companies that want to go out and raise venture capital, because you might be able to get a little bit of money from some angels and stuff, but if you ever aspire to really building a big company, you will never get there until you understand how your customers are paying. And we all understand, if you go back to the example of the purse, you know, we all understand that luxury goods are overpriced relative to what it costs to make. But people pay for the brand. We all know, you know, that you could pay $100 more for an iPhone than this Android phone, and people are willing to pay it because some people just love Apple products, right? And Apple exploits that. They protect their brand, they have a high quality reputation, and they've got very high margins because people will pay for that. So, you know, and now Samsung, this will sound dated when somebody watches this, Samsung's starting to get a pretty good reputation itself. And behind them, you know, is HTC and some of these other lesser brands where people just, if they were the same price, you'd always buy an Apple product, right? So anyway, like I said, it's a very complex topic, but you need to think through how you're going to, what your strategy is for pricing, okay? Are you like Walmart, where you're the low-cost provider and people will buy from you because you're convenient? Or are you Nordstrom, where people come to you because there's a selection of high-quality goods in an environment with a lot of customer service? All right, how will people pay you? Okay, it's kind of related to the point above, right? If you're selling leather purses to distributors who sell to retailers, okay, you know, they may pay you directly, you invoice them, but they may not pay you for 60 or 90 days, I don't know. If you're selling something through your website and you can charge people on PayPal, you get paid immediately. If it's an iOS app, you're giving Apple 30%, but you get paid immediately. If you're a relative of mine is a quilter and does crafts and handicrafts and stuff like that, and she just got a little Square device for her smartphone now, so she can take credit cards from anybody, anywhere. So she gets paid immediately, but that costs her 2.75% as a commission on the credit card. Okay. If you're selling a medical product, but it's going through a distributor, the distributor is going to want 30 or 40%. Okay. So again, understanding who's paying you and how they will pay you is really critical. If you're licensing to Bausch & Lomb, again, there's always exceptions, and I'm generalizing, but Bausch & Lomb may not pay you the big bucks until they're shipping something, until they're making money, right? So no matter how well it goes, it may take years for them to just do all that work before you start seeing money, okay? So again, how will they pay you? In that case, I'm presuming that they pay you a royalty, but on things that they sell. But you may negotiate for, and it's very common in pharmaceuticals, to get some royalty payments or some milestone payments as you make progress. So, everything's negotiable. I'm not trying to teach any one approach. I'm just trying to make you aware of the importance of thinking through that. This, too, is the second to last bullets, again, could really be the subject of a 2-week seminar. But somewhere out of all of this, you have to build a budget. You have to now start thinking about who am I going to hire, how much am I going to pay in rent, what materials and supplies do I need. I have to hire lawyers, I may have to hire salespeople, I have to get a phone and internet, I got to buy computers, okay? And then once I start making stuff and selling stuff, I may or may not need a factory, I may or may not need to pay suppliers, okay? If you have to license technologies from other companies, you may have to pay them. If you're licensing a patent from the university, you may or may not have to give them something, either money or stock in your company, okay? So, again, there's just no general rule here. You have to sit down and map out what that is going to look like. And you have to be able to demonstrate, at least in a financial model, that if you're successful, that the business makes sense, right? Because you take all of these risks, and there's no point in going forward if at the end of the day, assuming you succeed everywhere along the way, you wind up with a lousy business. So you have to have a vision that if you get through all of these milestones, at the end of the day, you've got a decent business. And if you think, for example, like of a franchise, okay? That's what you get when you buy a franchise, is a very clear set of principles and guidelines with a very high expectation of what's going to happen, because it's a proven concept, it's a proven idea, they tell you how to do it, they tell you how to advertise, they give you all the systems, it's all there, okay? But in your case, you're doing the first thing, so all of that's unknown. Now, again, I would tell you, you'll never get it right, okay? Things always change, but you have to start somewhere. And the hardest thing, in my experience, for people like you, is just starting to make some of those decisions and starting to clarify. In your case, you may want to look at your business 2 or 3 different ways, right? One way is, do we license it to Bausch & Lomb? Another way is, do we build a manufacturing company? It's not to say that that's the right option, but you might want to model it and sort of see what that looks like, right? Some people don't have the ability or the experience to go raise gobs and gobs of money, and other people do. So what's right for you may not be the same, may not be how I would approach it, you know, depending upon the assets that I have at my disposal. Okay, and then the last point, and again, this is really a whole topic in itself, but what I recommend that you do is you first have to build a budget, okay? And the first step is you got to understand what your expenses are going to be, okay? So assuming that you never make any money, you know, how much money do you need to pay the people and do what you want to do? Obviously, in a budget, there also needs to be income, so you need to think then about how you're going to make sales and when those sales are going to occur. More than likely, and this is always true in technology businesses, there's a period of time when you're spending money but before you have any income, right? And then later, you would hope that when everything matures and you have a good business, that you're making a profit. But along the way, you're going to have to get money from somewhere to finance that business. I'll talk about that in a minute, but that money can come from investors, you can get started with a grant, there's SBIRs and so forth. But nobody, but if I went out into the world and said, hey, I've got this new material for displays, there's a huge opportunity because, you know, billions of smartphones are sold every year, and I want you to give me money so that I can go build my business and make displays. Somebody might say, okay, well, you got to do the R&D, you got to build a pilot factory, you got to go make it, you got to go sell it. How much is all that going to cost? And I might say, that's $200 million from where I am today to when Samsung is buying a lot of this and I'm making a lot of money. And you could well appreciate that nobody, even if they could afford it, would give me $200 million right now. Okay? It would be like what you do with your kids. You'd say, I'll give you $1 million. You go do something that demonstrates that you're making progress, right? Maybe it's a pilot. Maybe in software it's a beta, right? Maybe it's a prototype. Maybe it's an animal test, okay? Something where I can say, if it's not working, I want to stop further. If it is working, then I go to the next step, right? So you can imagine financing, I'm doing this reverse, is sort of a stepwise sort of thing, right? Imagine, for those of you who are academics, if you write a multi-stage research grant, okay, to NSF or whoever funds you, they might say, well, it's a 3-year grant, but there's a review after year 1. And if it's just not working, we're not going to throw good money after bad. Right? So the way in which businesses are financed are very often done in a similar way. You get a little bit of money to start out, but you have to define milestones and criteria that are indicative of progress so that when you go back looking for the next money, people know that you're on the right track. Okay? So again, not necessarily things that you can answer today, but if you write a business plan and you think about the process of what it's going to take to raise money for your business, you ultimately need to know that. I would encourage you not to dwell on this at the moment, but it's important, and a lot of seminars sort of start here, but I think that that's kind of misplaced. But you are eventually going to need a legal entity like a company or an LLC, okay, to protect your idea and to protect you personally from any liability that might happen. And if you have several people coming together who are founders of the company, or you need to hire people and employ people, or you need a legal entity to receive grant money, you have to have some type of company. Okay? I'll I'll leave the topic for another time because there's different kinds of companies, okay? And there's pros and cons and why you do one over another. There's C Corps and S Corps and LLCs and all that. I'm not going to go into that unless you have questions. We can go deeper. The point is you don't do it on your own. You need to create a legal entity. You don't want to be spending money or hiring people out of your own personal checking account. That is unambiguously a very bad idea.